I'm here with Professor Inga Wolframm, and she is just going to have a chat with us today about her abstracts and posters and everything she's been talking about over the past couple of days.
How long have you got? No.
For you, as long as you want. So if you could just go over maybe the first study that you spoke about, and then we can speak about the second one later.
Yeah. So while I was here, I actually had two completely different topics, which I think to some people they might have thought, oh, but I'll explain a little more. I'll start with the one that perhaps most of our audience might recognize, and that is, so the first study I presented was on eye tracking and judges, and what we did, it was a lovely study that we did in the Netherlands. As some people might know, I've done this eye tracking and judging and bias for some time, with the idea that, the sport of dressage is such that we know, and because we also know it from other sports, that there is bias involved. And that has got something to do with the fact that when you look at a horse-rider combination, there's an awful lot to see. And the human brain, and here I go again, but you can't really quite understand the context unless I sort of give you the figures. So imagine per second, we as human beings are being confronted with 11 million bits of information. And don't ask me how they counted this. I've got no idea. But anyway, but our brain is only capable of processing between 50 and 60 bits of information. So not 50, 60,000, 50, 60. So that essentially means we have to make a choice. And that basically means when a horse-rider combination does what it does, a judge has to decide, what am I going to focus on? And I know that we all think that we look at the whole horse, but that's humanly not possible. Mm-hmm. We look at bits of the horse, and our brain then comes up with an image that approximates what we think we saw, and based on that, we have to take a decision. But that basically means that the stuff that we can process is obviously limited. It's not the whole horse. And that basically means that if people look at different things, which they do, we also get different results. The thing is even though we have judging criteria, and at first glance they look very extensive. The only problem is they're so extensive that they become slightly vague in terminology. We talk about the harmony of the horse, and we talk about the horse, working through from behind and, towards the contact and being in balance. But how do you assess this? And you see, the fun bit is that when I ask people this, they look at me as if I'm completely insane. Like, have you not been in this industry for some time? Yes, but you know what? My interpretation of what I think harmony is, or contact, or the horse being happy, or whatever, might be completely different, likely is completely different to yours. So which key elements do I focus on in order to assess what the judging criteria tell me to assess? And if I don't know this, and if I'm being pressured to decide, is it a 7.5 or an 8, I might be drawn to look at the nationality of the rider, or, especially at the top level of the sport, people are very well known. So if I have to decide, do I do a 7.5 or an 8, and I can't decide, but I have to decide because I have to give the number now because the next movement is coming, then I might decide to go, oh, but last week he or she did really well, so I'll give an 8 rather than a 7.5. And it's really important to notice that this is the level. We're not talking the movement deserves a 3 and I give an 8. That's not the level of bias we're talking. Mm. But because of that does have implications if we keep doing this. And that kind of bias has been proven in other sports, but also in dressage. But to be honest, I find this really negative, because we know that the bias is there, and this is something that we'll always have because we're human beings. So what I'm interested in is, so can we develop guidelines essentially that help us determine what do people actually look at to make a good decision? And eye tracking is essentially a system where you put on glasses and it measures what you're looking at. And you can do this with a fixed system, with a computer, where you sort of attach a strip and then it measures what people are looking at, which from a science perspective is really good because you can show lots of people the same films. And we've done this in the past and that's been published. But what we did this time around, we actually sat Grand Prix judges around an arena, all with glasses on, that measures what they're looking at live. And then I was interested in finding out whether their visual search behavior actually impacts on their scores and how they differ, etc., etc. And long story short, well, there are some, shall we say, positive correlations, but for the different movements that we looked at. But to be honest, they are so few and far between, shall we say, and they're very individualized that we can't generalize. And this is a pattern that we've seen time and time again. Essentially, judges have individualized visual search patterns. You can kind of see different elements, the front of the horse, and everybody gets really excited when I say this, but this is a good thing because the front of the horse is an important shortcut. If you have lots to look at, you might as well look at the front, because if something's wrong in the back, you'll see it in the front. Mm-hmm. If you only look at the back, you won't see the front, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. The feet are a popular area to look at, but the problem is we can't see across the board the same visual search patterns. But what we do see is time and again other criteria popping up. For example, the level of the rider. We had different levels of advanced riding, so we had advanced, we had Prix St. George and Grand Prix riders, and what we saw for some of the movements that judges gave the riders at the higher level higher scores. And intuitively that seems to make sense, but when you think about it, that's weird, because riders should be assessed at the level they're competing at. So why would the same movement at different levels, why would a rider who rides at a higher level immediately get automatically higher scores? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, but that means that the judges at that point probably thought, I don't know what they thought, but they perhaps scored the other riders at the lower level at a Grand Prix level. That makes sense?
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to say is that at this point in time, even though we're dealing with highly accomplished individuals, and it's really important that I keep stressing this is not judge bashing, and I keep repeating this, because judges are doing an incredible job and we need them for the sport. But the system that we operate in is so broad in its detail, if that makes any sense at all, that it doesn't give them any guidelines on what to look for. And especially now in the increasing pressure surrounding equine welfare, welfare signals of horses, we need to help our judges. We need to help them to provide them with guidelines. Okay, for this movement, what are the key aspects? And then not 100, but 3 or 4. What are the aspects that you need to look at to base your score on? And eye tracking is a tool. It's not a solution, but it's a tool to help people realize, hey, hang on a minute, I don't see the whole horse, but I look at this and this. Because once you know what you're looking at, then you can start retraining your visual gaze.
Would you say that instead of, so you could either say, because with the use of AI coming in and everything, you could say, I know, which we've had some conversations at this conference about, so there's a few options, but would you say that it would be a good idea or a decent idea, I won't say good idea, to completely replace judges with AI judges, basically, or potentially using eye gaze tracking to make sure that the judges are looking at the right things, or you just tell the judges to look at the right things and you just have to trust their judgment? Do you know?
I do. Okay, so I'm gonna address all of these one after the other.
Okay.
So AI. AI, it's going to happen. It can't not. And I'm actually quite a big AI fan. I think AI is super, but AI only gives you what you know, output equals input. Yeah, input equals output. So so what we have to be super clear of what we're putting into the system. And that's my biggest concern. And the people I've spoken to about this, they also know that this is my biggest concern. Not so much that we're using AI, because I actually think it's a good idea, but we don't even know yet which areas of the horse we actually think we consider the most important. I think if we want to use AI, this is the essential first step, that we try and determine, so what are the elements that we want to see in a horse, and then also taking into account different types of horses, etc., etc. You know, in the early development models of AI, you know, if you look back at what Google did, etc., they had a few programming issues, shall we say, where they used just one particular cohort to train the model, and all of a sudden the model misinterpreted lots of other input simply because it had been trained wrongly. So we need to be super careful that when we program AI in whatever way we want to do this, that we're really clear that we actually know what we want AI to assess, and that we use a broad enough cohort so that we don't get the bias towards the fancy warm bloods. So that's one. So I think, so in that sense, it actually keeps coming back to the same point. We need to be crystal clear what it is that we want to see, and then not do it not describe it in vague terminology such as a happy horse or harmonious or whatever else, but what is it? You know, when we're talking about overtrack, how do I check overtrack? Well, overtrack's relatively simple. You just look at the feet. But if we're looking at extension of the frame, do I check that at the front? Do I check it at the back? Do I check it at the feet? Do I check it? What I see judges doing, they check the arena and then the horse and then the arena. And when I first saw this, I thought, what are they doing? You know, is it a measuring fault? You know, why are they looking at the arena? But in retrospect, it's because that's how people judge distance. You know, how quickly is the horse traveling from where they're right now to where they're supposed to be? Because judges have a really good eye for how fast a horse is supposed to travel in the extensions. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So these are all really important elements that we need to consider. Now, and I've forgotten your second point.
The second point was, so the first one was AI, the second one was using eye gaze tracking.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, whether we should. Well, I find that quite Big Brother is watching you, so I.
Yeah, I know. That's what I was thinking. Is a bit.
Yeah, but I do think that so there's several ideas. One of the ideas I've sort of been thinking about is because essentially what I've seen from the research, not just this research but other research as well, that people have individualized search patterns, gaze patterns, and to the point really that to this point I've not found two that are exactly the same, which is a bit weird. But that basically means people have very individual, it's a bit like a fingerprint. So what you could also do is you could investigate where, you know, what the individual search patterns are. So for example, I'm not a judge, but you know, I know that I focus a lot on the front of the horse.
Yeah.
And this is, you know, this is also my personal preference. I like horses with lovely big necks and stuff. So my eye is always drawn to that. So if I was on a judging panel, you could say, okay, so Inga looks at the front of the horse. You know, she focuses on the head-neck connection. You know, checking is the nose in front of the vertical. You know, is the muscle lifted? You know, that kind of thing. But then, Chloe, you might be the one looking at the back of the horse. So if we were both on a panel, we would be really complementary to each other. So why not sort of develop a personal fingerprint for judges to sort of say, because that way, because you see, what I think the beauty of our sport is, and also of the different expertises, is that all of these people who are judges, who are trainers, they do have a lot of experience. And I think it's really dangerous to sort of do away with all of that, because that experience has been built over years of practice. But I think it'd be really useful.
And passion, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It'd be really useful to build on that and to sort of to look at, okay, so what are their strengths, you know, because horse rider combinations aren't one-dimensional. So why not sort of say, okay, this particular judge looks at the front, this particular judge looks at the back, because then we'd also have a division of tasks which we've tried in the past, but that's not been received with that much enthusiasm. Because I think judges are a bit worried. I don't know. I'm sort of that's my interpretation of it, but I think they might be a bit worried that's really boring. That we sort of put one judge there who only looks at the feet, which then sort of takes away the pleasure also of watching horse rider combinations. But if you said, okay, so this particular judge looks at the front, this particular looks at the back, which is a bit more in line with their own experience, while at the same time perhaps also educating a new generation of judges and helping them by tracking in training their behaviour so that they know what they're looking at.
That sounds a little bit more reasonable than my suggestion.
More 90s, it's a little bit less 1980.
Yeah,
right.
No, that's great.
And then lastly, I think I've already answered this. I think the beauty of our sport is watching it. The goosebumps you get when you see a horse rider combination performing, and it does look effortless. Whatever we look at when we look at effortless, there is an absolute beauty to it, and I think it would be a real shame to get rid of that. So you will never hear me say we need to get rid of the judges. Absolutely not. I think they're absolutely vital, because there is also something in that combination where I think it is an aesthetic sport. It is an art form. And if we're saying we're replacing art with just objectivity, I think we're at risk of losing the soul of the sport.
Yeah, I think that's put lovely. Definitely. I really like that. Well, Inga, thank you so much.